Welcome to the studio. This is Ekaterina Nesterenko with you. Today, a powerful blow to the occupiers' Logistics 11 fuel tankers have been burning for a second day. In the Sumy region, the Ukrainian Armed Forces have launched a counteroffensive. Panic in Moscow and a new wave of mobilization of cannon fodder. China has created a mini drone for reconnaissance the size of a mosquito. The US has used bunker-busting bombs against Iran's nuclear facilities for the first time. And for dessert, a sex scandal involving an oligarch close to Putin. All this and more in just a few seconds. But right now, please like this video and subscribe to the Ukraine Today channel so you don't get lost on YouTube. Well then, let's get started. Ukrainian intelligence fighters struck a freight train carrying fuel on a railway section near occupied Tokmak in the Zaporizhzhia region. 11 tank cars are burning spectacularly when the rails have melted there. The black column of smoke and fire can be seen for dozens of kilometers. In short, the occupiers' logistics have been halted for at least a couple of weeks. Without fuel, the equipment won't move. Great job, guys. A couple more strikes like that, and the Kremlin's gas station will finally run dry. And that's not all. The Ukrainian Armed Forces have launched a counteroffensive. Commander-in-Chief Alexander Syrsky reported the Kindrativka, Andriivka and Yablonivka line has been held, and the enemy has been pushed back. In Yanukivka, our forces advanced between 200 and 700 meters forward. Andriivka is once again under Ukrainian control. The situation in the Sumy region has been stabilized. Next, this line extends right up to the border with the Russian Federation. Well, the Russians wanted to take our Sumy, but they got a beating instead. Let us recall that according to the General Staff of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, since the start of the full-scale war, the losses of the Russian Federation have already exceeded 1 million people. Just the other day, in a single day alone, there were over 1,000 more. The Kremlin is in turmoil. There aren't enough people in the troops, and to fill the gaps, they are resorting to using migrant workers from Central Asia. Uzbeks and Tajiks sign short-term contracts only to end up in the meat grinder. The main intelligence directorate has already confirmed. Among the killed, there are 200 dead who are migrants. China has become the key supporter of the Kremlin's war machine. This is reported by The Economist. In the wreckage of Russian Geran, drones flying toward Ukraine, almost all components are made in China. These include chips, antennas, explosives, and even assembly equipment. As the National Times notes, the Chinese government is actively investing in military technologies. Drone production is subsidized by the state through tax breaks, industrial parks, and direct support for the industry. And although the public emphasis is placed on civilian applications, the most promising developments are military. Here, for example, is a mini drone the size of a mosquito created for reconnaissance. One Janga, I Live Children's Sanjo came out. And now, attention, another ally of the Kremlin is North Korea. Media reports say that Kim Jong-un is ready to send 25,000 workers to assemble combat drones for the Russian army. This is approximately what OISLA looks like. China provides the brains and parts, North Korea supplies the labor force, and Russia is the client of the war. Details in our report.
A new batch of North Koreans for the Kremlin's needs. Kim Jong-un is reportedly preparing to send as many as 25,000 of his citizens to Russia. According to the Japanese press, citing diplomatic sources in the West and Russia, the Koreans will be employed in drone manufacturing.
According to the sources, this refers to a plant in the Alabuga Special Economic Zone in the Republic of Tatarstan, which was, as reported, very recently and reportedly successfully attacked by Ukrainian drones.
After the highly successful drone raids on the Alabuga production facilities, none of the local workers want to go on shift anymore. As a result, the Russian army has started to receive fewer Shaheds, and Putin is losing his levers of pressure and methods of terror, analysts assert.
It turned out to be no easy task to find hundreds of people in the depths of Tatarstan who are willing to work 12-hour shifts every day, performing monotonous manual labor in a hazardous weapons factory, constantly under the pressure of state defense orders and the threat of imprisonment for disclosing state secrets.
That's when the North Koreans came to the Kremlin's rescue. The latter have no grounds to complain about working conditions or 12 and even 14-hour shifts. Any job in Russia is better than what they have back home in North Korea. As a result, workshops that produce 6,000 drones a year will be able to double if not triple their output in just a few months or even weeks.
After the effective neutralization of the Iranian UAV production complex, the issue arose of a lack of technology exchange, a lack of components, and a lack of Iranian specialists. To fill these existing gaps, the Russian Federation will attempt to significantly increase UAV or drone production either within its own territory or in its satellite countries.
Meanwhile, the internet is already joking about the professional skills of North Korean drone assemblers, recalling how they panicked when they first saw UAVs at the front in 2024. However, military experts do not share the mockery of internet commentators. North Korean soldiers and engineers are not as bad as they might seem at first glance.
You have to respect your opponent. That's the first step toward victory. Underestimating your opponent, on the contrary, is the first step toward defeat. And bringing in DPRK citizens should, to a certain extent, help fill the gap in specialists when it comes to scaling up UAVs. And accordingly, I don't rule out the possibility of technology exchange. For the Russian Federation, destabilizing the situation on the Korean Peninsula is extremely important, as it serves to distract Ukraine's strategic partners from the situation directly in Ukraine itself.
What is also extremely important is that, upon arriving in Russia, the North Koreans will not be assembling simple Shahed drones at the factories, but rather much more deadly weapons of their own design. We're talking about 2 models of large drones at once. Visually, they are almost indistinguishable from the legendary American Global Hawk and the reconnaissance drone Reaper.
That North Korean project, I emphasize once again, is a copy of the Predator. It's not the Strike Shahed 131, it's the Shahed 136. This is much more sophisticated equipment.
And this is exactly what the Kremlin is desperately lacking right now. At the same time, the 25,000 North Korean soldiers who have been announced will also be carrying out other tasks on Russian territory.
25,000 is actually half the size of the operational tactical group Belgorod, which is responsible for covering the Ukrainian-Russian border and is currently facing off against the Ukrainian Defense Forces units. I do not rule out the possibility of so-called legend creation, the presence of North Korean military personnel disguised as laborers, construction workers, specialists, or anyone else.
And if you think about it, the Kremlin doesn't actually need a full 25,000 pairs of hands for drone production. But with rifles in their hands, North Koreans would be very useful to Putin in those meat-grinder assaults.
It is precisely the presence of 25,000 citizens, let's call them that, from North Korea, that will allow the Russian Federation to significantly, A, address the issues of countering the Ukrainian Defense Forces directly in the Kursk region itself. These are, accordingly, the battles in the area of Tetkino and in the Lushkovsky district, as well as the redeployment of operational reserves. And the most combat-ready units are concentrated in the Kursk region. The 810th Marine Brigade and the 76th Airborne Division are there for direct participation in combat operations on the territory of the Sumy region. This apparently is what lies behind such a scenario.
This could become one of the main plans for the summer Russian offensive announced by the Kremlin.
The US has used a bunker-busting bomb against Iran's nuclear facilities for the first time. The US Air Force carried out a massive strike on 3 of Iran's strategic nuclear sites, Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan. They used heavy bombs designed to destroy underground fortified targets. This is the first such strike since 1979. President Trump stated that the uranium enrichment facilities have been destroyed. B-2 bombers took part in the operation. Amid the American strikes, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi is urgently flying to friendly Moscow for advice. Incidentally, the Russian Foreign Ministry has already issued a strong condemnation of the US strikes, calling them a violation of international law and UN Security Council resolutions. It's amusing how the Kremlin suddenly remembers sovereignty and the charter, considering the recent shelling of Ukrainian cities. But no matter how much they puff themselves up in the swamps, the so-called Russian economic miracle is over. The chief banker of the Russian Federation, Elvira Nabiulina, has admitted that the resources sustaining growth during wartime are running out. But the authorities already have a new solution: let children support their own parents. Could it be that Russia is about to introduce a tax on the elderly? The answers can be found in our journalists' report.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine Today. Join us now.
Resources are on the verge of exhaustion. Claims about the stability of the Russian economy do not stand up to the facts. War, sanctions, inflation and uncontrolled spending are destroying it from within.
There's no other way to describe it. This is not our choice. We don't want things to develop this way.
Whether you want it or not, it's already happened. Over the past 3 years, Putin has repeatedly boasted about the resilience of the Russian economy. However, these claims have proven to be illusory. Even Kremlin economists are now increasingly speaking openly about the problems that are worsening by the day. The head of the Ministry of Economic Development, Maxim Reshetnikov, stated that the Russian economy is on the verge of a recession.
All our figures are just a rearview mirror. Based on the current sentiment in business and the indicators, I think we are already, so to speak, on the verge of slipping into a recession.
On the verge. What if we fall? Well, does the Minister of the Economy say something optimistic? Otherwise, right now, the whole internet will be saying Reshetnikov predicted that we'll fall into a recession.
Didn't predict that. I said we are on the verge. What happens next depends entirely on our decisions.
What is a recession? It's when your country's GDP is negative compared to the previous year. It's not growing, it's falling. If this recession lasts not just for a year, but for 2 years or more, then it's no longer a recession, it's a depression. So for now, a recession means that your economic indicators are shrinking.
The chairwoman of the Bank of Russia, Elvira Nabiulina, also stated that many of the resources that have fueled the growth of the Russian economy in recent years have been exhausted, and the authorities need to think about a new growth model.
But we need to understand that many of these resources have indeed been depleted. We need to think about a new model for growth. And here I also agree with the author of the last point about the exhaustion of the current economic growth model. This means a transition to a new technological paradigm.
According to the forecast approved by the State Duma in May for this year's budget, Russia will end the year with a deficit of 3.8 trillion rubles. In other words, the liquid part of the National Welfare Fund is already 1 trillion less than what will be needed by the end of the year. And I want to emphasize, this is just a forecast. The experience of the past 3 years shows that the actual figure is significantly worse than what is forecasted.
As of December 1, 2024, the liquid part of the National Welfare Fund amounted to 5.8 trillion rubles. In half a year, it has shrunk by 3 trillion. Simple arithmetic shows that if current trends continue, the fund could be completely depleted by the beginning of 2026. This is a very real threat.
The funds available in the National Welfare Fund are not enough to cover the deficit. Some might say that besides this fund, there are other resources, all right? Let's say oil. Oil, the export of hydrocarbons that is not just oil, but also natural gas and so on, brought Russia 500 billion rubles in May 2025, whereas in May 2024, they brought in 1.5 trillion rubles. In other words, revenue from the oil and gas sector has dropped threefold.
Traditional sources of income are shrinking while expenses remain unchanged. To somehow remedy the situation, the Russian government is coming up with various options. One of these is to require Russians to pay pensions to their parents and elderly relatives themselves.
Essentially, the state is stepping back, since paying pensions is one of the government's main social obligations. Secondly, what is the point of the state if it does not provide security for its citizens and does not pay pensions to those who have worked for it? And by the way, these pensions are paid from the taxes that people themselves have paid. So it's not just that the state is somehow obliged to go looking for money for pensioners, but it is something it must do. But it should do this based on the money that is collected in the form of taxes. Because if pensions are not paid, then naturally the question arises, why pay taxes at all?
And also, Russia's finance minister Siluanov has proposed taking all the money that citizens have in banks.
60 trillion rubles is an enormous amount. So here you have two extremely negative scenarios that are currently being discussed. But there isn't much time left between discussing them and actually taking action. So we should expect all of this, and not sometime in the distant future, but during 2025.
Putin's regime is growing weaker by the day. It is depleting its resources and losing support within Russia.
Meanwhile, in the so-called stronghold of Russia, the demographic situation is falling apart. And while the authorities rack their brains over the numbers, Father Tkachov offers a truly brilliant piece of advice. You don't need money to have children, you just need to pray. As for those who complain about poverty, Tkachev calls them people with a hole in their head. Here perhaps one could argue, because that hole has long since become a diagnosis for all of Russia.
People don't want to have children, so let's give them money. And then what? Even today, there are people who have many children. And by the way, healthy children. They don't get divorced, and they don't resort to things like IVF. And they don't have much money, if anything. They have very little. And in order to be good fathers and mothers for them, whether you give them money or not, nothing will change, because their mindset is already in the right place. If someone has a hole in their head, no matter how much money you give them, that hole will keep them from making good use of it. It would be like feeding a horse for nothing, you see.
Another priest, for instance, suggests closing hypermarkets on Sundays, specifically to increase the birth rate.
He runs around with that cart in some place like Auchan. And then what more can you expect from him?
But why no one suggested stopping the killing of Russian Ivans in the war? That remains a mystery of Russian values. And so, as they say, from prayer to the filth of the Russian elite. While some are being advised to pray and have children without a penny to their name, Kremlin oligarchs are drowning not only in money, but also in sex scandals. Putin's oligarch Oleg Deripaska is in deep trouble. His name has surfaced in a case involving a network trafficking underage prostitutes for influential sugar daddies connected to the Kremlin. More details in the following report.
Preserve the traditions and values that have always been especially revered in our country throughout all historical eras.
While Putin talks about family values on camera, Russian media have published an investigation into a network that sends schoolgirls to provide sexual services to Russian oligarchs. Journalists gained access to 25 volumes of the criminal case against the pimps. The case materials mention more than 30 episodes of criminal activity. One of the main clients was Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska.
Is the guy perhaps young?
He's 40 years old. He looks a lot like Oleg Deripaska. For me, the ideal is Oleg Deripaska.
His name is mentioned in the interrogation video recordings, and the data matches open sources.
That's where love really shows itself, not just in kisses, hugs, and cuddles. Those are important too.
The network for recruiting girls operated at least from 2018 to 2019 under the cover of regional children's beauty contests, modeling agencies, modeling schools, and castings. There was demand for 15 to 16-year-old virgins.
We call this 5161. That's it. If she's 15 or 16 years old, she must be clean and, of course, a virgin. After that, this girl is introduced to clients. The clients are usually billionaires.
It was a bright red liquid that I slowly poured out.
The pimps called this dressing. The girls themselves recruited their friends into the network. It looked like a pyramid.
The names and voices of some of the people involved have been changed for their safety.
One of the underage girls connected to Putin's associate Oleg Deripaska was 17-year-old Irina Saprikina from Izhevsk. When the girl refused to go to another client, the pimp started threatening her with Chechens, saying they would deal with her mother if Ira didn't continue working. A similar story was told by another girl, Alena Yaroshenko. She was first offered sex with Deripaska when she was 15.
He told me that he was not a pedophile. Absolutely not. There was some unpleasant situation with an older woman where she did a lot of bad things to him. And that's why he chooses young girls, either of age or almost of age, simply so they won't harm him.
According to the publication, as reported in the media, Deripaska was making plans to take her virginity during the St. Petersburg International Economic Forum.
Russia can surprise the world, not only in this way. In Russia, I believe, so to speak, the good times have already arrived. The president, to his credit, has won.
Most often, Deripaska met with underage girls at his estate in the Krasnodar region or in an apartment in Moscow.
Deripaska will come to Moscow for 3 days. That means every day he had to have a new girl.
Deripaska is a robot. He had sexual intercourse with me.
So, you had sexual intercourse? In what form?
In the natural way.
Do you understand what natural way means?
Yes, so the girl would go easy on him.
Money gave him power and a sense of total impunity. After intimate relations, the girls received not only money, but also expensive gifts. Deripaska also gave the schoolgirl a MacBook, an Apple Watch, a diamond pendant, and a ticket to the Bolshoi Theater for the opera Carmen. Another victim of the billionaire was a 9th grade girl from Izhevsk.
I had to go anyway at that point.
Were you being forced or something? Couldn't you just take it without doing anything?
Because I would have to pay myself the amount that Maxim and Anastasia were supposed to earn.
5 people organized the meeting between Deripaska and Popova: Svetlana Titova, Alexandra Shatireva, Olga Goncharova, Maxim Nekoziev, and Anastasia Yakusheva. All of them are mentioned in the case. Despite numerous mentions of his name in interrogations and wiretaps, no official charges were brought against Oleg Deripaska. When the case materials were handed over to the prosecutor's office for an indictment, the name of Deripaska, whose fortune exceeded $4 billion in 2020, simply disappeared from the documents. But Deripaska and his assistants are absolutely certain of how old we are. The managers check the girls' documents, and the oligarch himself knows because he systematically enrolls the girls in universities. If Oleg likes you, you can be sure that you'll be studying at a university. The investigative actions in the case were completed in October 2020. In the end, only the pimps ended up in prison. And one of those convicted later joined the terrorist organization Wagner PMC, managed to fight in Ukraine, and afterwards received a medal and a pardon.
Help us with pumps, rifles, shotguns, anything will do.
Putin's associate Deripaska has not found himself in sex scandals for the first time. In 2018, a video investigation was released showing high-ranking Russian official Sergei Prikhotko vacationing on a yacht with Deripaska and the manhunter Nastya Rybka.
Instagram really does have a lot of personal photos of the very real oligarch Oleg Deripaska. Well, see for yourself, there's no way you could Photoshop something like that.
After everything became public, Nastya talked about how she flew to see businessman Deripaska in that very Krasnodar. Rybka said that Deripaska would summon her to his dacha.
Shubich took you with him. You were, once again, just a bit late for him.
Listen, we walk out of here with you, just to be clear, you'll twist your arms and you're done for.
You know the story. Our relations with America are bad. Why? Because their girlfriend's in charge of it.
Russian politics is notoriously dirty and deeply corrupt. Aging, self-serving officials know they can get away with almost anything, and they'll easily avoid any real punishment, simply because Putin himself personally protects them, ensuring their safety and impunity.
That's all for now. Please like this video, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel, Ukraine Today, so you don't miss our upcoming episodes. See you next time!